Hi, this is Thunderhawk talking about the recent riots in England. I took my customary 2-mile walk into town the morning after the third night of rioting in England. Walking is a good exercise for critical thinking and sparking the little grey cells, in the words of Hercule Poirot. The subject for my contemplation was, of course, the youth riots and the reasons why they happened, and alas will continue to happen. I sat in my favourite local Italian cafe, sipped a cappuccino and read the daily tabloids while my ears picked up snatches of a radio interview with UK Prime Minister David Cameron. The tabloids gave their deeply considered reasons for the riots, and the Mr. Angries of the letter columns echoed them. Their reasoning was generally as follows: the rioters were scum, mindless morons, the defective products of multiculturalism, racial degenerates expecting free handouts from the government, using social networking through Twitter and BlackBerry to organize the riots. The corollary, of course, was that these sites were evil and had to be controlled or shut down. The irony is that the very same commentators were complaining about lack of internet freedom when certain Middle Eastern countries were shutting down social networking sites. The solutions proposed were send in the military, give the police more powers to tackle the problem, use rubber bullets and water cannons, deportation of those involved in the riots who were not born in the UK, deprivation of state benefits, long jail sentences, control the social networking sites. Now, these are knee-jerk reactions, understandable in the circumstances, and superficially may have some validity, especially if one were a victim. However, I do not propose to comment on the ostensible reasons for the riots, but on the underlying malaise that caused them. Something is terribly wrong with the foundation of our socio-economic structure, which needs to be addressed. The recent student riots were the earth tremors that are heralding cataclysmic events. The current youth riots are the canary in the mine that is starting to cough and splutter, a manifestation of deeper forces at work. Cameron's reasons are that there is, quote, a complete lack of responsibility in parts of our society, people allowed to feel the world owes them something, that their rights outweigh their responsibilities, and their actions do not have consequences, unquote. Nothing original about his comment, but politicians are not noted for their originality. I will return to his comments later. His solution is to come down hard on the rioters, another brilliantly original idea. What many people do not realize is that these riots were not unpredictable. If politicians and their advisors did not realize that their policies over the years would lead to the unrest we have seen recently, the student protests, union discontent, and now youth protests, they are pretty naive and should not be in positions of leadership. Some of the underclass, the poor, uneducated, hopeless, are rioting or support the riots because they have been abandoned by a system that is rigged to increasing the wealth of the few. The haves in the system look aghast and tut-tut as the disadvantaged try to destroy the visible evidence that reminds them of what they cannot afford and what keeps them oppressed. The shops, the banks, and the police that enforce the rigged system are targets. But wait till the system starts to suck the money from the middle class and they start hurting. And the signs are that it must happen in order to fund the financial scamsters for their reckless gambling debts and to prop up the fraudulent financial system. Riots by teenagers? You ain't seen nothing yet. Our socio-economic system is based on a structurally unsound foundation. Our financial system, which drives socio-economic life, is based on a scam. That is, money can be created out of thin air, so-called fiat money, and multiplied to more than the reserves and assets held by the bank, fractional reserve banking. The scam is compounded by the application of interest, usury to use its correct term. The Bank of England's interest rate is currently 0.5%. But I saw a TV advert recently offering loans at an annual percentage rate of a whopping 264%. Shouldn't these loan sharks be in jail? Of course, it is the poor who will be taking out these usurious loans, as banks will not lend to those they term a credit risk. Usury is the root of all the problems in our financial system. The booms and busts, the various bubbles, the toxic financial instruments, scarcities and gluts. This has led to the social unrest we see around the world and the riots we see in England today, soon to spread to other Western countries, including the USA. All indications are that the current financial system based on usury, fiat currency and fractional debt-based banking has failed. All the finger-in-the-dike efforts to prevent collapse of the system are doomed to failure. The world's monetary structure is starting to collapse, and we are seeing the results of this in the fracturing of political systems and social unrest, wars of aggression and chaos. World leaders are running around trying to find solutions, but these will prove as futile as the little Dutch boy's finger. The system is a giant pyramid or Ponzi scheme, and, like all such schemes, contain the seeds of its own destruction. We have been conditioned over hundreds of years to accept this fraudulent system because they say there is no alternative. The objective of the vampire squids, feral elite, financial terrorists, whatever you wish to call these fraudsters, most of whom have no idea that they are perpetrating fraud because of the brainwashing and obfuscation over the years that there is no workable alternative to the system, is to aggrandize the few at the expense of the many, through usury and gambling by the feral elite on so-called financial instruments with imaginary values. The gambling losses are underwritten by hapless taxpayers and non-taxpayers alike through the intercession of gullible, clueless and corruptible politicians. As money is siphoned from the poor to the rich, there is creation of a small number of multimillionaires and billionaires, and at the other end of the scale a large majority who are a paycheck away from poverty. To put the obscene amounts of money that the rich have into perspective, $1 billion or pounds each placed one on top of the other would be over 55 miles high. A billionaire spending $10,000 or pounds a day would take about 274 years to get through his billion. Is it fair that one person should have so much wealth while another starves? This fraudulent system takes from the have-nots and gives to the haves. According to a UK government-sponsored report, the gap between the rich and poor is at its widest in the last 40 years, and the gap is getting wider. In the US, the gap between the rich and poor is at a record high. All indications are that the current financial system based on usury and fractional debt-based banking has failed. The key to this aggrandizement by about 10% of the population is interest or usury, especially compound interest. How can the fraud be stopped? The solution is simple, but it will be difficult to apply, as the aggrandizers will be appalled at the destruction of their power and fight against it tenaciously. Only unselfish, committed, strong-willed leaders with courage to fight the backlash from the feral elite and their supporters can achieve the desired outcome. The many solutions applied at various times just perpetuate the present scam. In order to have a just monetary system, there has to be a revolutionary change in thinking and a 9/11 event for this to happen. The 9/11 event is getting nearer. Global financial meltdown. And it will take courageous leaders to break out of their current brainwashed mindset and apply the solution. And what is the solution? I believe the solution to our current financial woes is to abolish interest rates and have currencies backed by a gold standard. The steps needed to achieve the objectives are as follows. Governments must be responsible for all money creation and reintroduce the gold standard. Banks must borrow their money from the government at a discounted rate. Banks must lend only to the limit of their savers' funds plus their reserves. Maximum interest rates that banks can charge their customers must be fixed by the government. Compound interest should be made illegal. Governments should gradually reduce the discount rate for borrowed money until it reaches parity with the fixed interest rate. The objective, of course, is to kill the virus of usury and cleanse the financial system that holds countries to ransom. When financial institutions discover that they cannot charge interest, they will have to charge a fee instead. Some say that charging a fee is the same as charging interest, that there is no difference between the two. The difference is that a fee is a fixed one-time charge and a borrower will know exactly how much he will have to pay back. Interest is a periodic charge on money lent until it and the interest, which can be variable during the period of the loan, are paid back. In many cases the borrower will have little idea how much he will eventually have to pay to redeem his debt. No interest banking is similar to the system operated by Islamic banks, which in fact originated in Judaic law. In fact, in 2009 the Vatican suggested that banks should look at the rules of Islamic finance to restore confidence amongst their clients at a time of global economic crisis. The Vatican's official newspaper, Osservatore Romano, said that, quote, "The ethical principles on which Islamic finance is based may bring banks closer to their clients and to the true spirit which should mark every financial service." Unquote. Alternatively, banks will have to operate on a no-saving or loan interest basis. There is already at least one bank, the Swedish JAK Medlemsbank, Members Bank, that operates interest-free banking successfully on a fee and savings points basis. The advantages of a system based on no interest are destruction of the debt-based monetary system that has been the source of our boom and bust economies. A more stable financial system will prevail. Countries will no longer be indebted to bankers. Countries will have to live within their means, as creation of money without equivalent backing by its gold reserves would create inflation and obviously reduce its value. When the US switched to the gold standard in 1834, it fixed the price of gold at $20.67 per ounce, and it remained unchanged for 100 years. While on the gold standard, the inflation rate between 1880 and 1914, when World War I started, averaged just 0.1% a year. There would be little or no fluctuation in the exchange values of currencies tied to the gold standard, and speculators will be hampered from gambling on a country's currency. In fact, currency speculation should be banned. In September 1992, speculators shorted the UK pound against the Deutschmark, which resulted in the pound crashing. As the money supply will be limited to the amount of a nation's gold, there will be less wasteful production from limited resources. For example, building millions of cars, most of which are unsold and which create attendant economic and ecological burdens. Countries that start wars will go bankrupt very quickly, so that there is a less likelihood of aggressive wars and the consequent wasteful expenditure on the military-industrial complex. As governments will create all money, they will no longer have to pay interest to banks. There will be no multimillionaires and billionaires created by the buying and selling of dodgy or worthless financial instruments and the pursuit of greed. Wealth will be more equitably distributed. There will be an end to the pyramid Ponzi schemes, as investors will no longer have the magnet of high and eventually false interest rates to attract them. Goodbye, therefore, to the Madoffs of this world. Goodbye to financial institutions and their toxic financial instruments, hedge funds and computerized high-frequency trading that manipulate and distort the market. Businesses, especially smaller ones, will prosper when the burden of interest is removed. More individuals will open up businesses as the interest risk is reduced and is eventually ended, and employment will increase. Economies will prosper as true market conditions will operate. Governments will find it in their interest to represent the voters rather than the vested interests of the rich and powerful, as they do now. Society will become less selfish and more cooperative. Globalization, which has contributed to many ills, will slow down as capital to expand will be restricted. Predatory capitalism and exploitation of labor for obscene profits will be made difficult. Mass immigration from poor to rich countries will slow down to insignificance. Any social unrest will be for factors other than money. Wars by wannabe imperialists will not be economically sustainable. Reverting to David Cameron's comment quoted earlier, what a contrast to the attitude he has shown to the even greater criminality, blackmail, financial violence, and economic destruction by the financial fraudsters, which are the real cause of the turmoil in cities around the globe. They have been guilty of the greatest harm to countries. Their predatory and morally indefensible actions against the economic health of the majority of people and the austerity measures that governments are forced to apply to make good these predators' losses evidently do not incur David Cameron's wrath and promise to use the full force of the law.